Stardust, Chapter 14 Monsters. Alien abduction not ruled out as Brazilian police forces discover the homes of several government officials abandoned with signs of struggle present. Lack of official statement from government blamed for increase in tension among citizens. In rare public appearance, Japanese emperor asked for order and peace amid tensions born from recently resolved US and China diplomatic incident. Public polling still shows great amount of concerns with recent attacks in China and around the world. 9:30 a.m. April 29th, 2015. Stardust Labs. Just what exactly do you have in mind for large-scale testing? Chen asked with an arched eyebrow as he regarded the others in the testing area of the Stardust lab. Nothing dangerous, I hope? A somewhat frigid-looking Valen sat at her desk, scrolling through the mountains of test data taken previously, with a grinning Jenkins shrugging. Twilight was the last one in the room and was content to graze on a salad bowl, while the new testing plan was laid out.
Well, we've done just about all the testing we can do here in the lab, right? Just about every combination possible was tested on the rodents, and even with Matt and me.
Lana explained as she looked to each of the others in the room.
I'm merely suggesting we just scale up a bit.
Valen's attention was finally diverted from her tablet as Jenkins finished her thought.
That is true. We have yet to run any sort of test stresses on this Wallflower ability to determine if its effectiveness is hindered in any way based on the kind of number of potential observers, or if it has any detrimental effects on the ability's source.
As she finished her thought, she gave Twilight a pensive look. Chen translated for Valen, and Twilight was already nodding.
I'm happy to help. What exactly are the conditions for testing today?
Even as she explained this, a small square of plastic wrap levitated from the desk Twilight was eating from, and snugly wrapped itself around the bowl before the bowl itself flew over to the cooler in the corner. The cooler snapped open and shut like a monster gobbling up the bowl, and all this occurred without Twilight so much as looking over her shoulder.
I will never get tired of seeing you do that, Twily. I thought you had to see some stuff that you were looking at using your magic on.
Lana asked with a grin. Twilight smiled in response and scratched one ear with a hoof before replying.
If I'm familiar with what's going on around me, I can move the objects around by memory. I can reorganize and reshelf the library back home in about half a minute without having to look at most of the books, but I am also pretty familiar with the layout of the library. Moving stuff by memory? That's impressive. How many books do you have in your library?
Lana asked, and she pointedly ignored the now hawk-like intensity Valen was now paying to this conversation.
Oh, about 500 or so. So what's the experiment today gonna be?
Twilight asked, and her enthusiasm became mixed with trepidation as she caught the look both Chen and Jenkins were giving her, as well as Valen's eyes jumping between all three.
Well, what? Was it something I said? Oh, no, nothing.
Lana quickly waved off her suspicion and started talking again before Valen could raise a huff about what she'd just said.
So, like I said, I have a plan for our test today. You hit me with that Wallflower spell, and I go take a walk around the base. Chen can do his voodoo on the computer so Valen can keep track of where I go, and if anyone notices my movements. Chen can also keep you company, and if you have any problems maintaining the spell, he'll be there to record it. Matt should be here anytime soon to help you also.
As she finished her explanation, she gave Twilight a wink and was rewarded with a blush from the unicorn.
I am so gonna go to hell for this, but she's just so cute when she's like that,
Lana mused.
I foresee only one problem with this proposed test.
Valen spoke up, and all eyes turned to her.
It would be suitable for stress testing the ability, but I'm afraid you alone would not be able to test the effectiveness in this environment.
She leaned back and placing one finger on her chin, she continued.
Specifically, Lana wandering the base isn't really an uncommon enough occurrence for the others she may come across to warrant their attention, regardless of this ability being cast on her. That's very true, which is kinda why I'm afraid I'm gonna need to borrow Shen's tie and lab coat,
Lana elaborated with a grin. As with her interaction with Twilight, she got the reaction she was expecting from both Chen and Valen. The former arched an eyebrow, with the latter fixed on her with a flat stare.
Trust me, guys, I have a plan.
After 5 minutes of creatively arranging the lab coat and tie, and turning on her radio headset, Lana turned to her audience and asked,
So, how do I look?
Valen's response was a disbelieving shake of her head. Shen's was just barely containing a smirk, and Twilight simply replied,
You look ridiculous,
before breaking down into giggles.
Great, that's just what I was going for. Got all the techie voodoo stuff ready to go?
Shen responded with a nod and thumbs up.
Alright, Twilight, hit me with the good stuff. Alright, here goes,
Twilight declared, and her horn flashed.
Alright, it's cast. Good luck.
With that, Lana gave the thumbs up before turning and heading towards the door. She almost had reached it when the door slid open and she was forced to quick step aside to avoid running into Matt. The other soldier entered the lab with a wave and didn't so much as react when he passed by Lana. Sensing the opportunity, Lana hopped through the open door to begin the test. The two guards outside the lab didn't so much as blink an eye or glance in her direction as she walked down the hallway. Lana turned and waved, then jumped up and down and received a similar lack of reaction.
Now it's time to see just how much I can get away with.
9:45 a.m. April 29th, 2015. Mission Control. David Bradford took a brief moment to enjoy the relatively calm sight of the holographic globe hovering in the center of the mission control room. No contacts were currently detected, no operations were underway, and no emergencies immediately demanded his attention. The highest priority task on Bradford's list at this point was reviewing and approving the report to be sent into the Council in less than 48 hours. After action reports and operator summaries were par for the course, as well as the monthly casualty list and new recruitment reports of the latter list, the most noteworthy addition was Shoji Zhang. As many assets acquired during XCOM's operation, Zhang was offered residence and protection for this foreseeable future. Zhang's counter-proposal was surprising, though. Not content to simply sit in a cell, he had offered his expertise as a soldier to XCOM. Some proficiency with firearms was to be expected, but his degree of skill is surprising, Bradford mused as he reviewed the Chinese man's test results. His past afflictions are still cause for concern, but if he's sincere, then he'll become a very valuable asset in our field operatives. Small arms proficiency is top-notch as well, as his physical conditioning. What I wasn't expecting was his familiarity with both long rifles and explosives. One of the scopes of his skills was known. Zhang was offered a spot in XCOM officially with a marksman designation with specialty training in demolitions. From what David had heard from his unit leaders, his reception amongst the other soldiers was somewhat frigid, but the men and women from Strike 1 had quickly adopted him. Zhang has also gone out of his way to volunteer for just about everything he could, including the other noteworthy part of Bradford's end-of-month report, Stardust. Since Bradford visited the labs, no further problems have really presented themselves. As promised, Dr. Valen had forwarded her reports and updated other necessary things to account for all the new testings that had occurred, and was acting less hostile towards the subject of her studies. Cold and prickly was the most commonly used phrase to describe her now, as opposed to acidic and venomous. Not exactly the best development, but still an improvement. The less confrontational approach had been made XCOM's guest more pliable and willing to demonstrate her abilities with the parameters set by Valen. The first test had confirmed Wallflower was unable to affect digital recordings, and to Bradford's immense but unspoken relief, there was no indication that the ability had been abused to escape its habitat. Testing the inversibility was never really completed, and from the reports, Bradford could only agree with that decision. If the account described by the subject could be trusted, the only time the want-it-needed ability was used is resulting in a riot over a ragdoll. Despite being unable to fully test the latter ability, David considered it a net gain overall. Since the incident with Stardust, he had made a point of reviewing not only the official reports, but the personal notes of associated scientists in the project. Having a somewhat less sanitized version of the official reports had proved enlightening, as the scientists tended only to submit what they could prove or observe. The testing was to locate Arcanite, as a first step for artificially recreating observed abilities, would no doubt make the Council extremely interested. On the other hand, Bradford has also taken notes of the descriptions of the creature that had dropped Twilight on Earth. The capabilities attributed to Discord were disturbing, but the one that bothered Bradford was the ability for it to send living beings instantly to Earth. If the limitations of teleportation were accurate, then Discord must have had staggering amounts of power combined with current knowledge of Earth. The first was a concern for another day, but the second was more immediate. Knowledge that the Earth was under observation from one alien power was alarming once revealed, but the possibility of another only made it worse. Speaking of making things worse, Bradford thought as he repressed a sigh and the impulse to pinch the bridge of his nose. The vast majority of abilities that Twilight herself could perform at will and upon request were no doubt going to be the focus of the Council the moment they got their hands on the reports, equally disconcerting with her nature. After months of dealing with monstrosities like floaters and chrysalids, having an alien that acted more like a cheery intern or college student that looked something like a kid's picture book seemed pretty preposterous. This is getting me nowhere. This time, Bradford couldn't suppress the urge to rub his forehead before he moved the Stardust research files into his own to-do bin and moved on to something that made more sense. Valen's report on the artifact received, per the Council's request, was as thorough as he'd come to expect. Her initial conclusion speculated it at some sort of beacon or communications device, one that was thankfully deactivated at the moment. Attached to her findings was Zhang's own account of how his former employer discovered it and how he had come to possess it. The Council's information stated that the artifact had been the subject of a black market auction, but Zhang's report had put it into much different lights of events. No auction had taken place, but a buyer has contacted the criminals directly and offered them an enormous amount of money to retrieve it. Zhang had been the one to be given this task, and either out of loyalty to his world or out of self-preservation, he had contacted members of the PLA-SOF, who then in turn contacted XCOM. It was good that he had. We likely would have come in heavy to retrieve it, Bradford thought, his mind drifting to the plans of XCOM that they had in place of the event that they would have to fight other humans. He blinked and frowned after allowing himself to be distracted, and his gaze drifted towards the exit, leading to the barracks. Something's coming, his gut told him. The more he ignored the feeling, the more important it seemed. Something's coming. Bradford locked his tablet and placed it on his desk before heading to the exit. A few of the command personnel looked up as he passed, but he ignored them. Whatever is coming is on the opposite side of that door. He crossed his arms as he approached the door and simply stared at it, as though the door would yield its secrets if he glared long enough. And just like magic, the door opened to reveal nothing. No, not nothing. That something is here. What do you think you're doing? Bradford asked levelly, and was rewarded with a yelp from that something. Jenkins stood just on the other side of the door to mission control after seemingly appearing from thin air. She wore a science team lab coat across her back with the sleeves tied around her neck like an impromptu cape, while a tie was wrapped around her forehead like a bandana. The extra slack of the tie was centered on her forehead and was looped and tucked back into the tie itself, which draped itself down the middle of her face. Lastly, and probably the most normal addition to this bizarre outfit, was a radio earpiece perched in one ear. A long moment passed as Bradford's stare turned into a glare while Lana became a white as sheet. The stare down was broken with a message from Bradford's own headset. Commander Bradford, Dr. Moira Valen would like to speak with you. Put her through. Commander, Private Jenkins is assisting us with testing in the Stardust labs. We've been following her progress through the base with the security systems and have been taking notes on the effectiveness of recent discoveries. Her current attire is part of that test, Moira explained quickly, and Bradford arched an eyebrow. Before he could speak, Moira continued. Thus far, you are the only one who's reacted to Jenkins' passing in any way. What gave her presence away? Nothing did. It was just acting on a hunch, Bradford replied. Oh, okay, I see, came to the response, though its tone suggested the opposite. Could you please send Private Jenkins back to the Stardust labs? We have collected enough data for this particular test. Will do. Bradford maintained his glare on Jenkins for a moment longer before addressing her directly. Dr. Valen wants you back at the lab. Yes, sir, Jenkins said, and retreated with almost indecent haste. 10 a.m., April 29th, 2015, Stardust Labs. Welcome back, Twilight smiled at Lana as she re-entered the lab, though her smile faded away as she saw the look on Lana's face. Are you alright? The female soldier blinked and tried to make a smile back. Oh, no, don't worry about me. I just had a heart attack when I saw Bradford on the other side of the door waiting for me. I swear, he can hear around corners without having to look. I have to admit, I enjoy the sight of you sweating under that glare, Matt said with a smirk. Serves you right after all the crap I have to put up with you around. It almost sounds like you're afraid of him, Twilight asked quietly, and was awarded with waved hands from both Matt and Lana to disregard her concerns, but the expressions on their face told another story. Is he really that scary? Well, it's not so much that he's scary, it's just those eyes of his, Matt explained slowly as he chose every word. Hell, I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, if he's in the right mood and you've earned his attention, then it feels like those eyes of his could crush you on the spot. Plus, he has an uncanny way of knowing when things are going on. I mean, Jenkins, remember what happened last time we were out and about? Out and about? Twilight thought to herself and was just about to ask, but she stopped herself. There's that look. They talk about things and give that look, and they never explain what they're talking about, though. Oh, I remember. Scuttlebutt says that he did something similar with Strike 3 and 6 during the last operation, too, Lana grumbled before untying the coat sleeves from around her neck and returned the tie to Chen. It's getting to the point where folks thinks he's like some kind of fortune teller. I wouldn't go that far myself, but that man has a knack for some spotting trouble.
and that is downright useful.
Of all the questions this conversation was raising, what Twilight finally asked seemed trivial.
Wait, who's Scuttlebutt? Oh, it's slang for gossip, rumors, you know what I mean.
Lana answered with a grin.
You know, the only thing that's faster than light is a juicy rumor. Not literally, mind you, but we humans have a tendency to spread rumors and gossip as a pastime. You might even call it a requisite behavior for us ladies.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. How would you know what's requisite behavior for ladies? Matt asked with a poorly repressed smirk. Did someone give you a list for you not to follow? Lana's response was a glare and a gesture that Twilight had been seeing with increasing regularity between the two. Before the banter could continue further, the doors to the lab opened. Charles and Valen rounded the corner of the privacy wall with the large boxes in their arms.
Do either of you need any help?
Twilight asked and was rewarded with a somewhat strained look from Charles and a wordless shake of his head. Another few steps and both boxes were deposited on the table in the center of the lab.
What's in the boxes?
Testing materials, Charles answered as he retrieved several smaller boxes and arranged them on the table. I had to make somewhat withdrawals from engineering to get some of these metals, while others had to be kind of scavenged from the surface. I'm also afraid I can't stay to assist as I'm needed down in engineering. I've numbered the individual samples along with a checklist. I'll also admit that some of the samples are of dubious quality, so I'll see about getting some better samples in the next few days. Charles gave his familiar smile and passed the clipboard to Valen before turning to leave. Let's see. First up is plain and simple iron. Matt picked up the first box in front of him and opened it before dumping it onto the table. A small metal bar clanged onto the table and rolled towards the edge before being raised into the air with Twilight's telekinesis. So, anything? How can you tell if it's, like, close to this Arcanite stuff?
To be honest, I don't quite know.
Twilight said as she floated the bar closer for her to inspect. It was completely straight down its length and lacked any of the tool marks, though a number was inscribed on one end.
It's been, well, a millennia since the last Arcanite was used. The books I've read tended to have very conflicting descriptions as to what Arcanite looked like, but all of them agreed that it produces an immediate and noticeable reaction when it comes into contact with spells. Contact with the ambient energy of the magical field is not really enough. It apparently requires the structured and direct intent of spellcraft to produce the reaction.
Do we have any idea what that reaction is we're expecting? Lana asked with a hint of concern. The woman gently plucked the iron bar out of the air and dropped it into the box as Matt unboxed the next sample.
It would be rather inconvenient if the reaction was something, like an explosion. I don't think that would happen, or it would be too dangerous to use.
Twilight shook her head as she grabbed the next item being offered.
Well, not exactly concrete evidence. Clover the Clever describes in his journal a stronghold that he had built into a cave complex of a nearby mountain with crystals and stones that glowed when he cast an illumination spell to kind of investigate it. Shortly after that entry was the first mention of his clover leaves, which are confirmed Arcanite artifacts, so that leads me to believe that it'll glow if we get a match.
The second sample proved equally mundane as Twilight passed it off to Lana to be boxed again. The third sample appeared to be metal also, though it was a twisted ball of scrap instead of a rod or block like the other two were. Ah, Chen got this one from outside, it looks like, Matt guessed as he offered it to Twilight. A quick telekinetic grab brought it directly in front of Twilight to inspect. She was about to pass it along to Lana when she saw a flicker of movement inside the twisted ball. Her curiosity won out as she brought it right up to her face to peer inside just in time for claw-tipped and gore-stained limbs to reach out towards her with frightening speed. Matt was in the process of unboxing the next sample when two things happened in rapid succession. The first was the whistle of something moving very fast through the air, close enough for Matt to feel its passing, followed by a bang. The second was Twilight screaming. Twilight was backpedaling as quickly as she could before her flank collided with the wall behind her, and a look of unrestrained horror and fear on her face. Matt's gaze quickly shifted to the floor, where he spotted what was quite possibly the biggest spider he had ever seen. Suddenly bereft of hiding spots in a very bright room, the spider began to scuttle towards the closest shelter, Twilight. The look on her face was morphing into horror and desperation as the bug zipped across the floor towards her. Her horn glowed with a dangerous amount of magic before she disappeared in a flash. Lana was already on the move as she slammed the open end of the box down on the would-be intruder. Little bastard is quick, and it sure as hell scared the shit out of me if it jumped right into my eye like that, Lana grumbled before looking at Matt. You alright? Sure, why wouldn't I be? Matt asked with an arched eyebrow. Lana pointed to the wall behind him, and he turned to see the last sample embedded a good 2 inches into the wall. He looked back to where Twilight had previously been and put 2 and 2 together. Jesus Christ, she almost took my damn head off with that.
Perhaps one of you should probably go check on Twilight. Valen unexpectedly suggested as she strode over the new wall decoration and prodded it with a stylus from her datapad. She seems unstable. Perhaps you should go, Matt. I've got to get this trespasser transported to secure holding, Lana suggested, and Matt narrowed his eyes at that. I know that tone. She's planning on something. Any further suspicion was derailed as he caught the sight of the spider crawling up the desk beside Lana, despite the fact that she hadn't really moved the box since it had first been contained. Jenkins, you suck at guard duty. He pointed back to her and was rewarded with another string of profanity as the female soldier turned to find the spider 6 inches from her face. Rather than stay and enjoy the sight of Lana repeatedly slamming the box on the wall while the spider desperately evaded, Matt decided to just bite the bullet and headed towards Twilight's habitat.